All right, great, everybody. Thank you so much for joining today. I'm really honored that we set this thing up 48 hours ago, and so many people have signed up to join today and are already online, and also to get three other panelists and guests with me today who know so much about this. And really, the focus is over the last several weeks. Or I guess it's not even several weeks now. It's the last 2 weeks, really. I've had just constant conversations with people about what's going on with the COVID-19 coronavirus epidemic. It's the top story in everybody's mind. And then invariably those spill over into like, so what does this mean for the industry? What does this mean for the big players in the industry? What does it mean for the supply chain? And so I was thinking on Monday evening, Tuesday morning, geez, it would be great to get some people on that really are already following this. They're thinking about this every day. Because it's part of their job to do that. Plus, they're really sharp people and they know a lot about our industry. So we've got Rani Molla from Recode and Vox. We've got Ben Rubin from CNET and David Watkins from Strategy Analytics, as you know. If you guys would bring up your video as well. I think we'll start with Rani Molla. Maybe you could let the people know a couple of things. One is who you are and your background, sort of what you do on a regular basis, and how your organization is looking at this, at what's going on with this global pandemic.
Hi, well, thanks for having me. My name's Rani Molla, and I'm the data editor at Recode, which is part of Vox Media. We have been covering coronavirus, I think, in every possible way. Me personally, I've been looking at a bunch of different industries based on the data we have coming out so far, how well or not they've performed. Explicitly, I've looked at the travel industry, cruises, hotels, things like Airbnb, airlines, obviously. We've also looked at conferences. Recode has its own big tech conference or relatively small tech conference, but we've looked at the direct economic impact that cancellations of major tech conferences have had on travel, on food, on hospitality, things like that. There's also another big one is the restaurant industry. If you look at OpenTable, which is a reservation platform, but also a platform that a lot of different restaurants use to figure out how many seats they have, who's coming to dinner tonight, that just obviously fell off a cliff this past week as a bunch of major cities have declared, that restaurants have to close. Obviously, no one's dining in at all. So you can sort of just see, if you look at trends over time, just this wall of like red last weekend, which is obviously going to get even worse. What remains to be seen from the restaurant standpoint is whether moving to delivery and takeout and that sort of thing for the restaurants that are doing that is able to counteract the effects of having to shut down their in-house dining. And finally, I've also looked at the technology. Right now we're on a Zoom call, the technology that's sort of mediating our new existence. A lot of people who are able to work from home are working from home. So we're increasingly using software like Zoom and Slack and Microsoft Teams and what have you, in order to try to find some like semblance of normalcy or get things done. So those are like the bright light stocks, the companies that are actually seeing more use rather than being shut down.
That's great. Thanks so much, Ronnie, on that. And it's interesting. I was just on making a presentation on Microsoft Teams. We're now on Zoom. I think right after this, I might be on a Skype call. And then I've got a hangout later today. So I'm trying to make sure everybody's happy, right?
Equal opportunity video consumption.
Oh, geez. It's like, okay, so that's great. Thank you so much. Next up, I want to introduce Ben Rubin, senior reporter at CNET, really focused on Amazon. But why don't you introduce yourself, sort of what you do, and how CNET's looking at this?
Yeah, thanks very much for that intro, Brett. So yeah, especially this week, I've been very busy writing a lot about what's been happening with Amazon. It seems that literally every single day, particularly this week, there's been an announcement related to the company. I just wrote this morning about the first COVID-19 confirmed case in an Amazon warehouse. This was in Queens, New York, in the United States. Obviously, they had cases that were in Spain and Italy before, and also in the Seattle headquarters. But this could really potentially add an additional hamper to Amazon's effort to manage this huge spike in just demand, consumer demand for all sorts of things like medical supplies and household staples. So I've definitely been looking at that and writing about that. I would probably say look next week for a story I'm working on about how warehouse workers and delivery drivers are responding to this. There have been a couple really good stories about this as well. Broadly for CNET, we're trying to provide readers with a lot of practical information. I mean, people go to CNET generally to look at, best lists of, maybe a TV or a tablet. So I guess we're trying to lean into trying to give people the best possible information to use during this time. So myth debunking, as far as these are certain things that aren't going to cure you.
Are there myths out there? I didn't know that.
Yeah, we're trying to as best as we can. So we're like leaning into the health and wellness stuff, and we have a science editor in Australia who's doing some really fantastic work, really just trying to give people the best possible information. And in my small neck of the woods, obviously just trying to keep people appraised of what's going on, particularly at Amazon, and then more broadly, what's going on with e-commerce and some of the major retailers as well.
Okay, and I should point out to the listeners here, what I'll try to do is afterwards, I'll try to send you guys some of the articles that Ronnie and Ben have written recently. They're great. I think they provide a different perspective maybe than you're seeing, and maybe the New York Times or the Washington Post is going to hit a little bit closer to home for the things that matter to people in our industry. So we'll make sure that we get those out to you as well. And we'll be active on Twitter if anyone has questions, at Bret Kinsella on Twitter afterwards. If you want links to some of these articles that they've written or their Twitter handles, we'll talk about that at the end, but just let me know. So we should also bring in David Watkins from Strategy Analytics. David, you coming to us from south of France?
Correct, yeah. Well, we've been on full-on lockdown for 48 hours now, which is a bit surreal. But we're adapting, we're getting used to it.
Yeah.
No, thanks for inviting me on, Bret. It's good to see you again. And just a quick introduction to the company I work for, Strategy Analytics. We're a specialist research consultancy focused on the changes in the global consumer technology markets across the entire value chain. That's right from manufacturing of devices all the way through to how consumers experience using those products and the pain points they come across using those devices. So my focus in the company, I'm a director within our intelligent home practice. I'm focused on home entertainment devices, as you know, and looking at everything from TVs to game consoles, PCs, and of course smart speakers, which you and I have spoken a lot about in the past. So we're kind of looking at this from what is the impact of the current crisis on demand levels for these devices. So we're assisting our clients with coming up with different scenarios on how COVID-19 may impact shipment levels during the year, but also, I think more importantly, what impact this is going to have on consumer sentiment. Now we're starting to see this become a global pandemic. Clearly, that is meaning that we're going to have a big impact on people's personal financial situations, less disposable income to spend on non-essential goods. So what does that mean to sales of electronics devices and TVs and smart speakers and so on? So we're coming up with different scenarios. We're helping our clients to try and plan as best they can for the coming months.
Right. So just follow up on that, David, because I think I saw an announcement and I haven't seen the report. I think it's might be client only, but I think you came up with within the organization 3 different scenarios of how this would play out. I'm sure you guys are the different segment leaders or thinking about those each of those scenarios and how they apply to your customers. And I should point out to the people here, David knows a lot about the supply chain. He covers from China all the way forward to the major consumption markets around the world, as well as some other places for component suppliers. So I'm interested in what you're telling people, maybe what some of those scenarios are. So you have sort of at least 3 cases I know that you've laid out, in general for customers. Maybe you could share that with the group, and then what you're expecting at a high level from the consumer side and the supply side.
Yeah, so I think the scenarios are, we see sort of a base scenario, a negative scenario, and a positive scenario. The base scenario being that the virus is contained and peaks sort of mid-April. A negative scenario being it being more prolonged into late spring and early summer. And the positive scenario, which I think we're already beyond now, where that's pretty much contained within the first quarter. Clearly, I think we're going towards at least the base scenario, if not more the negative scenario. I think at the moment we see, from what we see, we expect the virus to sort of peak around late April, early May. Of course, change very, very quickly. But based on that, we'd expect the supply chain to start to recover. We think the issues within the supply chain will be relatively short term. Already in China, a lot of the factories are starting to reopen. A lot of the workers are starting to go back. It's going to be a slow process, but some of the contacts we've spoken to within the PC market, within the TV market, expect to see, getting towards 100% production capacity by the end of March in some cases. So it's going to take some time to get back to complete normality, but we think that supply chain issues will be manageable, and we'll start to see stocks being replenished moving into Q2. So certainly Q1, we're going to see shipment declines across the board in all product categories recovering, maybe into Q2 as well.
Mm-hmm.
But some recovery in the supply moving into the second half of the year. On the demand side, however, that's where things are clearly a bit more uncertain, and I think that's where a lot of companies and manufacturers of these products have a lot of concerns at the moment. And there's still a lot of unknowns. It depends on the product categories. I think big ticket items like TVs, smartphones, we're probably going to see an extension of the replacement cycles for those products. So people putting off replacing them for a longer period and keeping their disposable income for more necessities. Products like smart speakers, which are clearly cheaper, perhaps there's less of an impact on some of these devices. We see the fact that more and more people are having to stay indoors now, particularly elderly people being isolated. Things like smart speakers and particularly smart displays have been used as communication devices more and more.
Right.
So we may well even see a peak in demand for these products as family members buy them for their parents or grandparents to help stay connected. So it really depends on a product by product basis, I think.
Okay. Well, let me just do a quick follow-up on that, because when we talk about this idea that they could ramp up to full production in China by the end of March, if we factor in Chinese New Year, which basically eliminates 2 weeks in January of productivity, we're going to look at almost a full quarter of lost production. So that's a significant supply shock. Now we've got a demand shock on the other side that people are going to be cutting back, and all this has a 45-day ripple effect, when in terms of getting to market. But are we looking at something like a quarter's worth of GDP, at least for some sectors, just gone?
I don't think so, because a lot of companies are diversifying their supply chain strategies now as well. So they're not, while a lot of manufacturing still goes on in China, some companies have shifted manufacturing to other companies. Take Roku, for example, in the US, they shifted a lot of their production to Vietnam at the back end of last year because of the US-China trade war. Other companies have been doing the same. They're diversifying the supply of the components as well, so it's not completely reliant on China necessarily anymore. So that's why some of those supply issues are perhaps less dramatic than they could have been. So yeah, while we expect to see declines, I think TV markets, PC markets, we could see sort of 20-30% annual decline in the first quarter of 2020 compared to last year. I don't think we're going to, and I don't think we're necessarily going to see a complete sort of disappearance of the quarter.
You're talking about a 20 to 30% decline year over year first quarter.
For those big ticket items, I think, yeah. For smart speakers, we think there's less of an impact. We still see growth actually year over year. Globally, China we think will be down clearly. Local demand in China will have had a big impact.
Yeah, sure.
Perhaps as much as 20-30% down, because people have just been not going out, and they've clearly had a longer shutdown period there. But yeah, it depends on the category.
All right, great. Let's bring Ben in here. We were just talking about supply chain. The supply chain e-commerce master, at least in the Western world, is Amazon. What are you expecting? What are you seeing in terms of like the current impact and how they're responding?
I think that particularly this week, I've talked to some experts about this that know a lot more than I do about supply chain management. And at the very least, it seems that they're putting their best foot forward to be able to handle this huge spike in demand. It's hard to say how long the spike will persist and how much of critical need Amazon will be for months going into the future to just provide basic needs like food, household supplies, medical supplies to people. But at the very least, they've contained non-essential items. So basically, they don't want to bring in a lot of devices, televisions, furniture, different things like that that aren't household staples, and medical supplies, because they want to bring those into the warehouses, stock them, and be able to ship them as quickly as possible. In addition to that, they have announced a huge hiring blitz of over 100,000 people, or roughly 100,000 people in the US. That's in addition to a US workforce of 300,000 people roughly, which is mostly warehouse workers. Now that's still going to take time to actually hire these people. They're probably going to have to do virtual interviews. It's going to take some time, but at the same time, it's actually quite fascinating to think that not that long ago, people were concerned about Amazon being too big, that they are a monopolistic power. Now all of a sudden, their huge size, their huge scale is actually a benefit to society in a certain way. I don't want to sound like I'm overly positive about Amazon, but at the same time, they are extremely well positioned, better than a lot of other retailers, to actually manage this type of spike in demand. They're actually used to it in certain cases with holiday and Prime Day. The difference this time around is that they had absolutely no planning whatsoever, whereas they usually do in those other cases.
Yeah, and this is where efficiency, an organization built on efficiency really is able to have the bigger impact, because they have to be able to move quickly and they have to be able to leverage all these things. That's great.
Yeah, the challenges are huge though. I mean, like, let's not say that they've succeeded quite yet. They're certainly well positioned. I think, there are a lot of other retailers that are doing a really good job of keeping their doors open for customers. A lot of local grocers, Walgreens, Walmart, Target, and I'm personally very impressed with any of the cashiers or folks that are restocking items, that they're getting up every day, getting out of their house to actually do these jobs. in a position where I can work from home, which is fantastic. But I finally had to get out yesterday. I went to the local Walgreens. I walked over there and just thanked the woman that was behind the counter. As I was walking home, there was an Amazon delivery driver. I yelled to him across the street and I said, like, thank you very much for doing what you're doing. Like, regardless of what you think about these giant companies, there are people that are really trying the best that they can in a difficult situation. They're also living paycheck to paycheck. So they kind of have to do these jobs. That's a lot of what I've heard too.
Right.
So some of these heroics are from necessity, which is really unfortunate. But it's been really, for me personally, gratifying to see some of those things. There's a lot of positive humanity that's been going on too.
There is a shared national experience going on right now that, and particularly at a time when we probably seem more fractured most of the time than we do unified as a country. It will be interesting to see societally, from a societal standpoint, whether that brings people together, if we're more open to interacting with people about different things, because there is sort of a common goal, and that's important for groups to get around. And I'm not sure we've had that common goal in a while. But Ronnie, let's bring you back into the conversation. I'm interested in particular, since you've looked at a lot of different things. You're a data reporter, obviously, and so that's where you start with this. I mean, what surprised you? What's really stood out to you that you think is interesting so far, and that might be sort of that story that people aren't thinking about?
One of the things I've been thinking about a lot, and Ben just sort of touched on this a little bit. Like, I'm a reporter. I get to go on Zoom and get my paycheck. Well, until whatever happens with the economy. For now, I get to continue doing my job. I've been thinking a lot about the types of work that can be moved online. And then those largely already have been moved online, whether we want it or not. But there's tons of types of work that can't be done over the internet, that involve people actually being next to other people. This is retailers, this is healthcare workers. It's also, pilots, things like that. I'm thinking a bit about the sort of divide that creates. What happens in the future if this is our new future of pandemics and we have to sort of isolate more frequently? Who gets to continue getting a paycheck while all of this is happening? There's a lot of long-term effects that come from that, which relate to the demand side of what David was talking about before, like whether people are going to be interested in buying TVs, whether they have they can buy TVs afterwards. Another element of this, I think, is automation. If we all are capable, or a lot of us are capable of doing this from far away, from a distance on Zoom, or if some of our jobs are going to be replaced after this is over, like they become too much of a liability. I'm wondering if this is going to accelerate the move towards automation in general.
Yeah, that makes sense, and probably likely. Ava, are you ready with a question?
Yes. Mark Layden wants to know, Amazon, Google have focused on flooding the market with products that are voice enabled. With consumer spending down, do you expect the incumbents to focus more on building out ecosystems for those products?
I'll jump in on that.
Okay.
So I'm really curious to see what the development or the technology development cycle will look like in the next year or so. So we're talking about lag of supply chain, we're talking about lag of demand. Usually come September, October, there are all these fancy events where, like, hey, we've got all these new products that we wanted to sell you in the holidays. Are those still going to happen? And if they do happen, are they going to be a lot thinner than they were otherwise? I mean, like, let's not pretend that everything is normal. Obviously, there are going to be a lot of engineers, a lot of developers, a lot of manufacturers that have lost a lot of time, weeks, if not months, to actually develop these new products. So how is that going to look? I'm actually curious, David, what you think about this and what your impressions are as far as what's that going to look like for the development cycle and for new products coming out, because those are obviously critical in convincing people to buy new stuff in the first place.
Yeah, it's a great point, Ben. And I think, from our standpoint, I think we'll continue to see that. The market is, a market like smart speakers is still relatively in its early days in many markets. Google, Amazon want to maintain growth, and to do that, they need to come up with more innovative products, different form factors to keep people replacing those products and buying more of them. So I think we'll continue to see those development cycles. I don't think we'll see a huge amount of disruption to that. Obviously, depending on how long this goes on for, whether those events will go ahead as scheduled, we shall see. But my view is that we'll continue to see the likes of Amazon and Google pushing product hard this year. I think we'll start to see more of those innovative ways of getting product to market. So last year we saw lots of routes to market from Google partnering with Spotify, so giving away Google Home Minis if you're a Spotify premium customer. I think we'll see more and more of that as a way for these companies to get their devices into people's home more. And the same with the Chinese vendors as well, in that respect. But at the same time, of course, building out their ecosystems. They want more and more people to be using their platforms and their devices and their services. On the smart home side of things, of course, both Amazon and Google are building out their ecosystem there, with more and more people staying at home. There's potential there to add more product in to help people with their daily lives, be that security, be that doorbells and so on. So I think we'll see both move side by side, ahead. But certainly product development, I don't think will be impacted too heavily.
Okay, yeah, that's good, because I was actually thinking that it likely would. I would say just around the ecosystem piece, events like this tend to create a lot of additional activity within organizations that's non-standard. And so even though I think there will be an increase in focus around some of the areas of the ecosystem, I have a feeling that it's going to be limited. So there will be some winners and losers depending on the category about what they think is important, because they're going to have to triage it a little bit, because so much of people's times is taken up with being online, or dealing with something with coronavirus, or dealing with the fact that shipping times, which are normally 30 to 45 days from China, right now are probably closer to 65 to 70 days and maybe 90 days very soon, because there's fewer shipping containers going across. And so I think all that is going to displace people's times. I think there's some things that they'll invest in around the ecosystem. I do expect them to really double down on the first party. So people know the first party, third party who are on this thing. I really expect that. The things they've already been investing in, like smart home, for example, that's going to get extra time. Some of these other things that are third party, around maybe media, because I think we're starting to see a little bit of an uplift in use in media through some of the voice activated devices. So maybe we'll see that. Some of the other areas I think might suffer a little bit. I don't know if Ronnie, if you had anything you want to jump in on that, or if you want to...
just one small thing, and perhaps it's my current myopia. Like, it seems like everything I'm writing and thinking about is about coronavirus, and our lives have sort of become very essential. Like, what do we need to do? What do we absolutely have to go out for? And I guess I wonder if, obviously it all depends on how this turns out, but if our thinking towards innovation becomes a lot more essentialist as well, like as if only the things that matter are getting food delivery to certain places, our entertainment in our homes. I could see a lot of innovation going towards like coronavirus thought, but we have to see how long this lasts.
I think that's right, and I think we have a precedent for this around September 11th, a time when a lot of us will remember. I mean, I think the Spanish flu is a very different time. It's harder for us to relate to what that was, But around September 11th, there were a lot of things that were similar to what we're seeing right now, I think, and they were long lasting. They changed sort of the structure of our economy in many ways. But what you saw is like tech really focused on very specific applications. So people who were doing general purpose consumer tech were all of a sudden doing military tech, like almost overnight, because there was so much demand to bring that up. And so it wouldn't surprise me, as you say, that like the smart minds pivot, right? They start going into this area. We're already seeing it, like people are already in healthcare. Like, so Orbita is, now they have this answer bot, chat bot that they're rolling out to healthcare providers for free. Like how to answer questions around coronavirus, how to do triage. They've got some things around how they can schedule appointments and things like that, because they can't handle the inbound demand. And so they, that's still in healthcare. They work in healthcare, but they were doing some other things just recently. There's another one, Eric Schwartz, who a lot of you guys know, writes for VoiceBot. He's working on a story right now. A company out of Israel is working on identifying coronavirus symptoms just based on talking, right? Because it does impact the larynx and the respiratory system. So they're gathering data right now from people who have it and don't have the virus, so that they can potentially give matches. I don't know how, it might just be the type of match that you go to and then you test to verify, but it could be a very quick way for people to triage. And these were people that were working on something completely different just 3 weeks ago, right? So this is like brand new. And so I think you're absolutely right, Ronnie. We're going to see these different types of innovation and the focus. And that's really important, because what are the brightest minds spending time on? All right, so Ronnie, let's come back to you. Let's talk about, I want to ask you a quick question. One of the things that we've written about, in fact, we might be the only people who've written about it, but certainly we were the first. Google had a bunch of coronavirus Google actions, third-party Google actions. They pulled them all a little over a week ago. And then just a couple days ago, Amazon pulled all of their Alexa skills related to coronavirus from third parties. What do you think about that? Was it a good idea? Should they have done that, not done that?
I think we're in a really interesting point in tech where all of these large tech companies had been largely hands-off. Obviously, they've instituted rules about things, and I'm speaking broadly here about just general what content they're allowing on their sites, who they're allowing to sell on Amazon, who's allowed to post what on Facebook. I think you're seeing a lot of tech companies really flex right now, show that they always could adjust what was on their platforms, and now they're doing it. Obviously, it took like a very disaster type situation where, if you have apps out there or you have skills out there that are giving people the wrong information, that is like literally a life or death situation. So they've decided to be a lot stronger in who they're going to allow to give what information.
Well, I think it's really, they're allowing no one to give information other than first party. So it's like third party, you're out. This is like, and I would say that, like, I get it that they were doing it. Certainly I get it from a legal standpoint, which I think absolutely is part of this discussion, right? There's like, what if we're responsible for disseminating through our voice assistant incorrect information? So that's like one. But I think there's a second one where, I think they would say, hey, it's our responsibility as someone who works in the market to make sure that we're providing good information. But frankly, what I saw is they just removed it, right? And now there's really nothing. And so people who would have been getting some information, there was good information. I think about Terry Fisher, doctor out of Canada. He had a flash briefing on coronavirus, and a lot of people were getting their information on that. It was really popular. There's another guy in the US that had it, but we're talking about a physician.
So whether they're throwing out the baby with the bathwater.
Exactly. So now, but they didn't replace it. So then, like, are we getting less information, and are we just relying on maybe one government source to tell us all the information that's relevant, when maybe that's not everything that we should be hearing?
Right. I mean, there's absolutely the flip side of it. On one end, they're trying to protect from what could be really disastrous misinformation, but the result of that is much fewer sources of information. And I guess they're making the active choice that these are the ones that we've just deemed important and that we're going to promote and that we're going to feel comfortable, like, having on our platforms. I can't say yet. I do know that it is, one thing I do agree with is that, like, it's good that there isn't as much misinformation floating around out there. But that isn't to say that they didn't get rid of plenty of things that would have been useful and important and good information.
Yeah. What do you think, David?
Yeah, I mean, instinctively, I thought probably the right thing to do. But yeah, the way we've just been talking about it there, I mean, I think it depends also on the type of information you're looking to access. Things like testing has been one of the big issues, right? Should I go and get tested? Should I go to the hospital to get tested? There's a lot of advice to know. Actually, if you're showing symptoms, you should be staying at home and self-isolating. There's not, as long as those symptoms are not too serious. But there's a lot of misinformation out there, and for things like that, maybe it does require some sort of, direction towards an official procedure that people should be following. But things like hand washing, third-party hand washing apps, maybe,
Well, there are still hand washing. If you go into the Alexa Skills Store and you search for coronavirus, 2 hand washing apps come up, and then one.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah.
In an airline as well. So just in case, like, anybody with their clean hands. What do you think,
Yeah.
Ben?
Yeah, I just wrote down a couple small points on this, which is, and granted, this thought process of move quickly and break things is something that the tech industry had been moving away from already. But the concept of experimentation, of being a broadly open platform, this is very similar to what Ronnie was talking about, doesn't really work in an emergency situation. The other thing that we also need to remember is that quality control is probably significantly diminished and limited at these giant companies because they're really trying to focus on just putting out fires at this point. So what's the best way that we can do that? Are we worried about making sure that people have as many different sources as possible, or do we just want to make sure that we can vouch for this one source and then move on to the next thing? And I would probably say the latter is what they're really focused on here.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Okay, so Ava, do you want to throw another question from the audience in?
Yes. So a lot of the questions have kind of been on a similar topic. Is, do you think that the fact that, one, people are at home more, and two, that it's impacting an older population, if voice engagement rates, like on smart speakers and voice in general, will increase?
I have some thoughts on this.
Go for it.
I think one thing I've noticed that with myself and with everyone are the way we're interacting with the world is changing. I've become so much more cognizant of all the things I touch, of the touch screens that were in the airport, when I was flying a few weeks ago, of how I gather, how many people are around me, how far apart we are. So I think this is a really interesting time to talk about something like voice technology that gives you that space. And all of that is, all of this technology in the first place is about how we interact. All this technology is about how we interact with technology, like the actual interface. And, I think going forward, there's going to be just a larger awareness of all the things we touch. So I can't see a way in which voice technology doesn't become more prominent as a way to just simply keep us more distant from viruses like coronavirus.
David or Ben, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'd agree completely with that. I mean, I think you're right. I think people are a lot more conscious now about what they are touching, not only in the home, of course, so they can avoid spreading germs to family members, but also outside as well. I mean, I was recently on a trip to London. I stayed in a hotel at Gatwick Airport where it was all touch controls within the hotel room. This was like the day. This was about 10 days ago. So you know, as we were starting to see more and more cases appear here in Europe. And I didn't even think about it, touching the touch screen to switch the lights off, to check out, and then, you know, walking through the airport. And I probably unconsciously touched my face afterwards. And I got home and I really thought about it. I thought, wow, it's amazing how many times you do touch surfaces. And you don't instinctively think, I'm going to go and wash my hands straight away. So I think we'll see voice come a lot more into those environments. So little gadgets, there might be ticketing machines, it might be ATMs, it might be keypads when you're paying at the checkout. That we'll start to see voice come into some of those environments as well. So we avoid having to sort of touch particular surfaces that are regularly touched by other people.
Yeah, I think about that. Like at the grocery store, are you better off going to the touch screen to check out yourself, or someone else who you don't know who's like how many people have touched it, or or to go to the checkout person who's going to touch all of your cans and food, and who knows like how many things that they've touched that other people have touched throughout the day. So this is, I mean, a difficult thing. Ben, do you want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, sure. It's interesting you mentioned grocery, because the concept of touchless payments is really taking off, and that is
the Go Store.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the Go Store, and also just contactless credit cards,
Correct,
using Apple Pay, Google Pay, where you're at least able to make the payment without touching anything. I think there's an enormous opportunity there, in addition to the fact that chip cards are slower than contactless payments in many ways. So you're providing an additional benefit to people. I continue to be skeptical about the idea of voice really taking off because of this in enterprise, just because the same problems continue to persist as far as open office areas, public spaces. I mean, like when my kids are yelling and screaming, it's really hard for me to get my Echo speaker to function properly just in my home. So that is something that they're going to continue to have to struggle with if they are going to try to enable more voice for the general population in public spaces. I'd be curious to see what it would look like. I think that the value of it obviously increases from this type of situation. But like I said, how are you going to actually solve those problems? They still, after 4 or so years of really developing voice, especially from Amazon, I haven't seen that done effectively yet.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think ultimately it's going to be the ears. That's where you're going to see it. You know, that's going to be the versatility outside the home, where you're in those public spaces, and it's going to lead to all these new use cases. But maybe you can just build on that. We're coming to the end of our time pretty shortly, so maybe you could talk about based on this pandemic, what do you expect to see change? Like you could say, yep, I think this will be different 6 months from now, 2 years from now, based on what we're seeing today.
Do I have to start with this? Do I have to? I mean, like, it is so hard for me to predict how things are really going to change. I guess from the perspective of e-commerce, Devin Winnig, who's the former eBay CEO, came out with a tweet yesterday that said that this is going to be the tipping point for e-commerce, where e-commerce is already becoming much more significant in people's lives, and it's going to ramp up even more because of this. What exactly that looks like, what elements of people's shopping behavior changes because of this, because they get used to online grocery perhaps, which has only been 3% of people's shopping for grocery. Whether that really takes off, it'll be really interesting to see. But as far as devices, I mean, it would be really interesting to me if Tim Cook were to do the Apple event in September and say, it's really easy to disinfect the new iPhone. You know, like you can wipe it with a Clorox wipe or any of those different things, because like those things are so delicate that people are nervous to use certain cleaning products on them. So
wait, I shouldn't have been Cloroxing my phone because I've already been doing it. So
apparently not. Apparently it could mess up the there's something on the screen. Yeah, it's okay. I mean, you're better off. The screen might work just fine.
Coronavirus or phone, I don't know. Sorry.
But those are my two guesses anyway.
That's great. What about you, David?
Yeah, I think we'll start maybe to see some changes in the home. I think the fact that we're seeing so many people work from home now, I really wonder if we're going to see that become more commonplace after this. The fact that people think, hey, this actually works. My setup's not too bad. My company's probably saving money. It's better for my lifestyle. And I wonder if we'll see a sort of an increase in people doing that. And therefore, the technologies that come in to help those people do those jobs in their home. Specifically around voice, obviously we're starting to see, I think we're starting to see a lot of the platform players helping people now in this situation where they've got kids at home and they're having to homeschool. So we're seeing the likes of Baidu in China have brought in a lot of educational tools through their smart speakers. So things like remote learning, potentially remote healthcare and health diagnosis tools through smart speakers by a series of simple questions. I think we'll see a lot more advancements in those kinds of applications coming through that are clearly now going to be tested a lot more over the coming months.
What do you got on your list, Ronnie?
I mean, I'd probably echo both of those things. Yeah, just e-commerce, food delivery, anything that you can get online, that there was an option to get online. I think there may be an increase in whether people are going to like actually do that now. And then from the working from home front, absolutely. Like I've written quite a bit about work from home and how it's naturally been trending upwards, but this really is exposing a lot of people to it who hadn't done it before. It's forcing a lot of people into it. And you have to think some percentage of those will be like, oh yeah, this wasn't so bad. As David said, a lot of bosses might be like, wait, maybe I don't have to lease this very expensive building in Midtown if I could, downsize and a bunch of my workers could work from home and I don't need to provide snacks or whatever else. And
So
also
bad time to be in commercial real estate.
Yeah, I know. Maybe thinking about that for another piece, but we have to wait and see. And then finally, I had talked to some designers a while ago about how work from home was actually changing what your home was like, how people are much more conscious of like having their homes both have a good office space or an area that is much more, that's much better for like an ergonomic work situation. And, if we're going to be quarantined in our apartments, you kind of want them to be a little nicer. So there's the thought that like maybe we go a little more all in on our quarantine creature comforts.
Yeah, I think those are great. I'll throw mine in the ring here. I think this could lead to a little bit of a renaissance of chatbots. We saw them being very popular a couple years ago, and then not so popular over the last couple of years as maybe we've seen the natural progression of the hype cycle. But we are seeing that conversational interfaces in general, whether they chat or voice, can be actually quite helpful when you've got surges in demand. To triage things, to help get people into the right queue, whether that's call centers or whether that's like your doctor, is part of the interaction with you. And if you think about it right now, if you go to a physician, and at least in the US, you normally will see a nurse, maybe a physician's assistant before you actually see the doctor, because the doctor's time is so valued that they want to make sure all the little things are taken care of before they get in there, because they only have 7.25 minutes with you. And I think that we might see, as we move some of those things online, as David, you were saying, and my daughter just had an online one. This doctor's office has never done online visits before. They did it this week. So I think we're going to absolutely see more of that. We need that type of efficiency in the healthcare system. But maybe it doesn't have to be a nurse or physician's assistant is the first line when you start your appointment. Maybe you interact with some sort of voice bot or chat bot first, and then it moves on to the humans in the loop. But I do think that these voice interfaces are actually going to get a boost. And what we find is that a lot of times with platform shifts, there is some sort of external shock that really kicks them into gear. So we've had this sort of linear adoption of voice recently. I know smart speakers look more than linear, but overall, if we look at voice, we see sort of this incremental gain since 2012 when it came out on Siri. And then, if you go back to maybe 2000 when we started seeing this in cars. But I have a feeling we're going to see lots of different types of technologies really get a boost AI being the biggest. People will start to think about how they can automate some of these things, forecast all these other things. But there's a lot more to discuss there. I don't think we have any more time today to do that. Everyone who's listening, first of all, if you missed anything, you showed up late, this is going to be on voicebot.ai next week, so you'll be able to watch it back. Also, what I'll do is I'll make sure that we share with you at least the Twitter handles of the people who are on today, and maybe some of the articles or some links to things that they've done recently on this, because I think there's really rich information there. Plus, there's a ton of questions. That's what happens when you put hundreds of people on a webinar. We got to 2 of your questions. I'm going to do my best to answer as many as possible on Twitter. So at Bret Kinsella. So what I'm going to do here is just to wrap this up to say, David Watkins at Reeve Watkins from Strategy Analytics. Thank you so much. Ben Rubin is at Ben Rubin at CNET. You can find him there. At Rani Molla, at Rani Molla, RANIMOLLA, in case you don't know that, at Recode, and at Vox. I think you'll see her titles there. Thank you so much for your time today. We'll try to keep this conversation going. Maybe we'll get back together in 3 months or something and try to do this again and see how things have changed, because I have a feeling we could do this next week and things would be different. But thank you so much for your time today. Thanks for everyone who joined. I hope this was useful. As you're sitting at home and have yet one more video conference to sit through today.